Hello everyone, Matt from Model Minute here and welcome back to the workbench for another unboxing. Today I'm taking a look at this, the Tamiya North American P-51D Mustang in 1/48 scale. So join me as I get stuck inside this box and see what it's like. So starting off on the outside of the box, we can see the fairly typical artwork that we expect from Tamiya. We've got this lovely drawing of the Mustang in flight with some clouds behind it. It is probably worth noting that we have one indication of potentially a paint scheme included in the kit, and we also have a second one here and a third different one on the other edge, but we'll talk about that imminently. Up here top left it says it's 1/48 scale aircraft and it's number 40, and we have some dimensions. We do have some other bits of information here, but as far as the English goes on this box, it's very limited, and I struggle to understand the other language here. So whilst I'm looking at things, it may not necessarily mean that that information doesn't exist, it just can't read it. So over here on the right hand side, we've got a copyright date. Now, copyright dates aren't always tooling dates, so take that with a pinch of salt, but we've got a 1995 date here. It does indicate to us that this was made in the Philippines. And as mentioned, we have one paint scheme annotated here, which is for an aircraft from the 362nd Fighter Squadron. On the other side, we again have more information that I can't read, but we have another paint scheme, this time from the 375th Fighter Squadron. This one is a little bit different. It has some more camouflage and a big yellow nose, whereas on this one it looked to be silver with a anti-glare panel, and then the one on the front of the artwork we have a blue nose. The thin edges don't feature any more pertinent information, although we do have an item code here of 61040 and an import address for Europe. So without any further ado, let's get the box open and see what we have. We'll take a look at the instructions first. And we have inside the instructions a little hints and tips sheet, which is nice to see. Gives you little hints and tips on test fitting your parts, cutting them from the sprue. I don't think we have any metal plated parts, so we don't need to worry about that. And we do have some tips about painting. And flipping over, we also have some more other tips on cleaning up our parts, which is good to see, especially if you've never built a model kit before. We do now meet our instructions. They seem to be an A4 kind of booklet. Sadly, they appear to be printed in black and white. It does feature some of the information we had on the box, as well as more information about the actual aircraft in various languages here. We turn over the page, and it's not A4, it just continues opening up. So we'll look at this page here. We do have paint colours suggested from the Tamiya range, as well as other bits of information and the tools we may need to use. And then we progress with the actual construction of the kit. So it appears that there is cockpit elements. We have an instrument panel with paint colours called out. I don't believe we have a decal for that, but we will look at that imminently. We do have a pilot figure included, so we can paint him as per the call outs on here. And our cockpit details consist of the main sort of cockpit part, and we have our chair and backrest, which gets glued in with a control panel and our control column. Having done that, we glue in the underneath sort of radiator where there'll be an air intake for that bit later, and we can also install our pilot if we wish. Turning over, we have our fuselage steps. They are a little bit cluttered. I feel the steps are a little cluttered, but they are relatively easy to follow. There are a lot of painting informations here with lots of things being called out. We sandwich our cockpit components that we've just assembled. Then we install our nose cowling part as well as another air intake, and it looks like we have the choice of engine exhausts depending on the variant that we are completing. Moving on from that, we have an internal part for our landing gear bay, and we can also install our lower wing surfaces. However, it does say if we're going to install our drop tanks, we need to open up these two holes here, and additionally on this side as well, because there was a drop tank on both sides. Moving on from that, we add our upper wing surfaces and our tail surfaces, and it does tell us the paint colour to use on the inside of the landing gear bays. Moving on from here, we can add our radiator rear shutter, our flaps, which appear to be in a flap down position, but I imagine we can also, we can glue our flaps in a raised position if we'd like to do so. The front of the air intake gets glued in here, as well as our bomb pylons and a landing light. It appears that we do have the option to have our radiator shutter in an open or closed configuration. Moving on, we have our landing gear, which gets assembled in a relatively straightforward manner, and our drop tanks come in two parts which get glued together. We then can install these various landing gear parts into the relevant places on the aircraft, and that is pretty much that. It doesn't make indication that we can glue our landing gear in a raised position, but I believe that if we glued in our covers, that would do it. However, I don't recall gluing in the rear. So this is similar to the Airfix Mustang I looked at a little while ago. The rear tail wheel has the doors molded on the outside in the open position. So if you were going to represent this aircraft in a flying configuration, you would have to cut that and fill that hole. Anyway, moving on. We do have our prop and a little poly cap that goes in the middle so we can have it freely spin if we want it to. It does come with separate blades. I'm not a massive fan, but they do look like they are keyed, so they should only go in one way and they should stay there. We do have the option of two different canopies. One is for a Dallas built and one is a normal. So they don't look massively different, but I presume there must be some difference if they've included them. That gets glued onto the lower canopy sort of part. And we have the option to put our canopy either in an opened position or in a closed position. There is also a reflector gun sight which needs to be glued in, and the little aerial that goes on the back of the plane, as well as the prop. And that's pretty much it. We do have some more extra notes about painting, about the colours that they were painted, and then we can move on to our painting instructions. It is disappointing, as I'm sure you can already tell, that the painting instructions are only printed in black and white, which makes it harder to understand what kind of colour we're painting stuff. It does take a little bit of extra work to go through and figure out which shade of grey represents which colour. So in some cases you may get confused. I know I have done in the past because they look pretty much the same. But we have one scheme here. That was the one on the box art, and it has silver all over with a blue nose. Then we have this one here, which has extra sort of nose stripes, but they are a transfer. And I believe this is silver all over, but it has a black anti-glare panel. This one underneath here is a little bit more complicated in the sense that it looks to be mostly silver, but it does have some camouflage sort of khaki olive green on the top, and it has a different colour nose. If we look at the box artwork, I believe that is this one here, which has a yellow nose on it. It also features D-Day stripes on the lower sides. And then turning over the page, we have another sort of camouflage one. This time it's camouflage upper and lower. I think this one had camouflage upper wings as well, but I would have to read the notes to fully check depending on which version I was going to do. And once again, this one has D-Day stripes included as well. So all in, that's 4 different paint schemes for 4 different aircraft. We do have some notes here as well about applying our decals. And that is pretty much that for the instructions. Generally fairly easy to follow. Would have preferred them to be in colour, but I think that may be a product of the age from which this kit dates. So let's now look at the other parts. I think everything comes, oh hang on, so not everything, right, we'll have a look at this. So this is the box. Clear parts come in a bag. Our transfers are also in the bag with some of the parts, which is a little bit frustrating because we do run the risk of damaging them when you do that, because they can move around and they could get scratched. So that's a little bit disappointing. We then have another bag of parts, and then we have a set of transfers which is not in the bag. So I don't know if these are an addition and they stapled them in, maybe they forgot, but they've stapled on a piece of paper, look. to protect them. So I wonder if they forgot to put them in. And I went, oh, no, we forgot that one. We'll best put it in. Some extra information in here, but it's basically telling you to like sort of read the instructions and things. But yeah, we'll have a look through everything here. We'll look at the clear parts first, seeing as they're the first ones here. The bag is just stapled closed. So we have our clear parts, which look to be really nice. Crystal clear from what I can see. No flash, which is good. And, oh, there's a little bit of flash, but only a tiny little bit. And the sort of panel lines are subtle. They're not like massive. They're not, you can't catch your nail on them. They're sort of a representation of them, but they're not like obvious. So some careful masking may be required for these parts here. But generally the plastic parts look to be pretty nice. They don't feel overly greasy or anything. In fact, they don't feel greasy at all. So that's pretty good. We also, in that bag, had 2 poly caps. So these are the little sort of rubbery plastic bits which hold our prop onto its mount on the nose, and it can help them freely rotate. That's the design choice that Tamiya went with for this particular kind of kit. So let's put those clear parts back in the bag so I don't lose them or ruin them. It's interesting that they staple them shut. I would have thought that they would have had a heat seal. So in here we have 2 little sprue. Well, we have a little sprue, and on our little sprue we have our pilot figure, which seems to be reasonably nicely moulded. That's pretty decent. Bit of a mould seam down the side there, but I don't think you'll notice that when he's inside of the aircraft. Big hole in the back though, which means that unless you sit him in a chair, which comes all the way up here, you couldn't actually use him like in a diorama or something else, but perfectly fine for this kit, not a problem. And then we have our sort of lower canopy part. That's nicely crisply moulded, no flash really that I can see on that. And then we have the rest of the parts from the other large sprue that was in there. So in here we have some rivet detail on our flaps, which is pretty nice. Ejector pin marks seem to be in places where we can't see them. We do have our holes for drilling out for our drop tanks. However, you may notice that we have additional holes here which are not referenced in the kit, which potentially means there is a different variant of this out there somewhere which has rockets, because I imagine those are rocket rails. We have our tail surfaces, tail wheel, upper wings. We've got landing gear detail here. I have read in places that the landing bays, the landing gear bays or something to do with them, is the wrong shape. I don't know enough about the Mustang to tell if it is the wrong shape, so I'll defer to their expertise. But if there is an inaccuracy in the shape there, I'm sure someone will let me know in the comments. But yeah, moulding quality is pretty good. The plastic feels a little bit flexible, but then again, it's a slightly larger kit than I normally see, so it would be understandable, but not particularly greasy. We have some little rivet details in places, as well as recessed panel lines and raised details as appropriate, and that is pretty much the same throughout. It's quite a nice looking kit. So yeah, pretty nice, not a great deal in flash that I can see. So let us move on to the other bag. The bag that contains our transfers, or 1 sheet of transfers at the very least, and we'll get that out. I'll look at the transfers in a minute. So on this sprue we have our drop tanks, and I would imagine, look, there was another sprue that came off this way which potentially had rockets and things, but obviously not included in this particular boxing. I imagine they probably snipped them off on this side for that version and vice versa for this version. But yeah, so we've got our drop tanks, our spinner, and our prop blades. Not a fan of single blade props, but I'm sure that they've designed it in such a way that it won't be a problem. We have our internal cockpit chair and backrest. We have the internal cockpit details, which come pretty much as one part. We have our nose cowling there. Internal landing gear bay parts, radiators, foot pedals, control panel there, which is reasonably well detailed, and then wheel components, and the wheels have got a fairly nice tread on them. And the fuselage halves, again, just like with the wings, recessed panel lines, some raised details in places, and rivets here and there. Particularly like that the rudder has this sort of stressed appearance to it as well. On the inside, we do have some additional details on the walls of the fuselage. But other than that, it doesn't look to be a massively complicated kit. We do have, and as mentioned, the landing gear bay doors on the tail molded on in the open position. So yes, this is permanently wheels down. We don't have an option for wheels raised without modification to the aircraft. And as referenced, this is the same way the Airfix decided to go with their 2024 tooling in 1/72 scale, which I find a little bit frustrating. I would have preferred to have had the option to have it in a wheels raised configuration, and then I could install a display stand or whatever. But yeah, modification will be required if that's the case. But I think probably we put that down and look at our transfers. So we have one sheet here, which I mentioned earlier may have been forgotten about and then added last minute. I think these are Tamiya's in-house own transfers. I have used Tamiya transfers before. They are, from my experience, generally fine. This features our D-Day stripes if you want to use them, or paint them yourself is another option, and also our roundels for the US Army Air Force. The transfers appear to be relatively well printed. The decal film is maybe slightly thicker than I'm used to from other companies, and the white does look a little washed out, which is a bit of a shame. I wonder how sort of white they would remain with another colour behind them, but hopefully they go on with no problems. But the printing is pretty good. So let's now look at the other decal sheet, which unfortunately was in this bag. Hopefully it hasn't suffered any damage as a result of that. So yeah, what have we got here? Yep, okay, there's a little dent right there. I don't know if that will pick up on the camera. You see that dent next to the number 2? It's next to the number 2. So it's not on the number 2. So fortunately, the number 2 has not been damaged, but that was close. On here, we've got all of our letter codes and the nose sort of artwork for one of the variants, as well as all of the other stencils and things that we'll need. We do also have these, which I believe are for one of the paint schemes to go behind your insignia, such as this one here, just on the fuselage sides, just to sort of clean it up to make the camouflage not look so sort of overbearing on it. But yeah, these ones look pretty nice. I actually think these ones look a little bit better than the sheet over there. But I suppose all that remains to be seen is how they actually apply to the model, as I've only done a couple of Tamiya kits in the past. And that's why I've got this one, is to give it a go and have a more of an experience of Tamiya. I do, however, buy kits which I find to be sort of cost effective, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, we have 2 sheets of transfers which seem to be printed to a relatively good quality, and I do have my concerns about the white on these ones, but hopefully you shouldn't have any issues with them. We had 2 sprues of a medium grey plastic with a very nice mould quality, lots of lovely details, but not an overly complicated kit. I really do wish though that they'd given the option to have the tail wheel in a raised position rather than just permanently down. We did get another little tiny sprue with our figure and our cockpit canopy sort of frame, and that's relatively nice as well. And then we do have our canopy frames. The moulding is really nice, however we did not have particularly prevalent canopy frames, so masking will take a little bit of patience to get it accurate. And 2 poly caps, we only need 1. We've got a spare one just in case we lose one. We did also have a hints and tips sheet, which is a good addition, and a set of instructions which, whilst easy enough to follow, perhaps are a little bit cluttered, but would have benefited from being printed in colour. Naturally, it all comes contained within a very nicely illustrated box. If you watch my reviews quite frequently, you'll know that I like to know the tooling age of a kit before I buy it. A lot of the time I just go in and buy it and see how it goes. So I had hoped that this would be a recent tooling, but we did have a copyright date, as you'll remember from the beginning, of 1995. So it would be, if Tamiya has this sort of pattern, I've seen it before, the copyright date is usually the tooling date when they reference it. Tamiya have this habit of creating a boxing, and then that boxing will forever just be that one boxing, until like the end of time. So this one is indeed a 1995 tooling. The tooling, etc., all dates from 1995. I seriously doubt that my kit dates from 1995. I don't think it's been sitting on a shelf from a warehouse or whatever for the last 30 years. I believe it's probably a more recent manufacture of it, as this is probably something that just keeps getting replenished and restocked over time. This kit has been in a number of different paint schemes and boxings since then, and even recently in 2023 you could get this as part of a model set with extra accessories such as more figures or a vehicle as well. That being said though, seeing as this is a 1995 tooling, I don't think it's necessarily up to the modern standards from Tamiya, but it certainly still does give other model companies a bit of a run for their money with the quality that you get inside the box. The other issues I've obviously mentioned aside. But how much did I pay for this, as you're probably asking? Well, I actually picked it up from a well-known chain here in the UK, and I paid £22 for it. £22 seems to be slightly high compared to other online retailers who have it for between £18 and £20, but we're pretty close to that with this price. On the whole, I don't think that's a bad price for what we're getting inside the kit. Maybe I did pay a little bit more, and I would have preferred naturally to get it for £4 or £5 cheaper, but it is in line with 1/48 scale kits from other companies. And I think as well that it does kind of reflect the age of the kit, as I do have another Tamiya kit in my stash, which is a considerably more recent tooling and does retail for a little bit more. But yeah, I think that on the whole this will be an interesting build, and unfortunately I will probably end up building it with the wheels down, but I'm not entirely sure which version I'll probably do. I'm tempted to go for the version on the box here, because I think it would be pretty fun to put it alongside my 1/72 Airfix version, which also has a blue nose. So that would be a fun addition, having these two side by side. But let me know down in the comments which version would you do, and did you think my assessment of this kit was fair? Also, I'm open to any more suggestions for other kits you'd like to see featured on my channel. As always, quick shout out to my channel members and patrons for the extra support they give the channel. Massive thanks to these guys on screen. If you'd like to join them, take a look at the links in the description. There are, of course, other ways to help support the channel if you'd like to do so, and again, full information is underneath the video. The best way to support this channel for free, though, is by subscribing with notifications turned on, so you never miss a modelling upload. The last thing to say, though, is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.